high tide on April 4th, the Titanic was backed into position and tied up at the ocean docks berth 44. Scheduled to depart on her maiden voyage on April 10th, the next week would be spent preparing the ship, provisioning her, and running the final checks on equipment. Since January, Britain had been in the throes of a coal strike which wreaked havoc on shipping schedules. Amidst numerous cancellations, the Southampton docks were overcrowded with more than the usual number of ships, requiring some of them to be rafted, as shown here in a view taken from the deck of the Titanic during that week. Arriving with almost 1,900 tons of coal from the trip from Belfast, the Titanic had to take on an additional 4,400 tons. Fortunately, with so many of the international mercantile marine ships laying idle, coal was scavenged rather easily to provision her bunkers. 417 tons were consumed during the week in port to maintain steam for heat, light, cooking, and working the winches. It was also during this week that the food stores would be provisioned, cargo would be loaded and stowed, and all the myriad details in preparation for a voyage would be checked, rechecked, and completed. Crew recruitment to fill out the ship's company commenced on Saturday the 6th. Stokers, stewards, stewardesses, and seamen were among those signing ship's articles. Violet Jessup joined the ship this day, having had experience on the Olympic. An anticipated shake-up among the senior crew occurred, though, when Captain Smith decided that he wanted a more experienced chief officer than the one that had been assigned. Therefore, Henry Wilde was transferred from the Olympic and bumped William Murdoch to first, Lightoller to second, and left David Blair, the original second officer, without a berth. Blair expressed his regret in a letter to his sister-in-law, saying, "This is a marvelous ship, and I feel very disappointed that I'm not to make the first voyage." The realignment of the senior officers did not affect the juniors, so Herbert Pittman, Joseph Vauxhall, Harold Lowe, and James Moody remained as 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th officers, respectively. Wilde had misgivings about his new assignment, though, and he wrote to his sister declaring that he did not like this ship. He had a queer feeling about it. April 10th, 1912, sailing day. Lightoller recounted, "At last sailing day arrived, and from end to end the ship, which for days had been like a nest of bees, now resembled a hive about to swarm. Captain Smith arrived on board about 7:30 from his Southampton home on Wynn Street, having said goodbye to his wife and 12-year-old daughter. At 62, he was retiring after bringing the Titanic home. He would have retired earlier, but Ms. May prevailed upon him to take the flagship on his maiden voyage, as was his tradition. As Commodore of the line, he was the most experienced and most highly paid of all North Atlantic commanders. Like Andrews, he was a natural leader, and a favorite among passengers and crew. Lightoller described him as a man any sailor would give his ears to sail under, and oftentimes first-class passengers would book voyages to sail with him rather than with a particular ship. At 8:30, Lowe and Moody assembled 2 boat crews and lowered 2 lifeboats, rowed around for about 20 minutes, and then had them hoisted back up. That proved to be Titanic's last lifeboat trip. The morning bustled with typical pre-sailing activity. First-class passengers, many returning from the season abroad, greeted each other as they prepared to board. Second-class passengers, like Eva Hart and her family, soaked in the atmosphere and excitement of boarding the largest ship in the world. Third class, like the Goldsmiths, endured the indignity of immigration officials snapping back their eyelids to check for trachoma, which if found would mean a summary refusal to board. Finally, at noon, it was time to cast off. Smith and the Southampton pilot George Boyer were stationed on the bridge, with Wilde positioned to the forecastle, assisted by Lightoller, Murdoch at the stern, Vauxhall and Lowe on the bridge, and Moody at the after gangway. Smith gave the order to sound the whistles announcing imminent departure, and just then a knot of stokers who had gone ashore for one last drink at the local pub came running down the dock, imploring Moody to hold the gangway. The young 6th officer hesitated a moment, but then he considered the men on board as standbys, reliable men hoping for a decent berth. He let the gangway go, and then amidst a flurry of orders to make the tugs fast, those tugs, Hercules, Albert Edward, Ajax, Vulcan, Neptune, and Hector, slowly drew her away from the pier. There was not as large a crowd to see the Titanic off as had seen the Olympic the June before, but nevertheless there was palpable excitement for those present to witness the maiden departure of the largest ship in the world. She slowly approached the River Test, and as tugs heaved and strained to make the 90-degree turn, she began to round the knuckle. As you can see here, there was not a lot of maneuvering room in that channel, and as she approached berths 38 and 39, where the outboard New York was rafted to the Oceanic. As the tide had just begun flooding, the Titanic's 35-foot draft did not allow for much room for error. The mammoth hull of the Titanic displaced a significant amount of water in that small space, and as she passed in New York, the strain of the suction snapped the mooring ropes with a loud crack, and they whipped into the air, scattering the crowd on the pier. Fortunately, no one was injured, but on the water there was unfolding a serious crisis as the New York was now adrift and headed for the Titanic. A flurry of orders on board the New York scrambled the crew into action as they flung mats over the side of the ship to minimize the impact of what looked to be an imminent collision. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Titanic, Smith and Boyer both ordered full astern, which checked and then halted Titanic's forward progress. Captain Gale of the tug Vulcan, in the meantime, was able to get round and secure a line on the New York, and this spontaneous teamwork averted a collision as the New York glided past the Titanic by a matter of inches. The New York was towed around and secured at berth 37, as the tugs held the Titanic in check. After an hour's delay, the Titanic more slowly proceeded down the river, with the Oceanic straining at the ropes, but never breaking. Finally, with the excitement abated, the Titanic headed toward Southampton water, where an intricate S-turn between the Calshot Spit and the Bramble lay ahead. A year before, the Olympic had collided with the cruiser HMS Hawk when the suction theory had first been advanced, which to many people explained the near collision with the New York. This time, however, with no approaching vessels, Boyer judged his distances nicely and executed the maneuver without any incident. The Titanic picked up speed as she made her way down the English Channel, until she reached the nav light vessel. Here, they slowed to drop off the pilot, and Smith and Boyer shook hands as Uncle George wished the Commodore good luck, undoubtedly expecting to greet him on the return trip in a fortnight or so. The next stop was to pick up passengers across the channel at Cherbourg.